Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're slipping into a side of ancient China that history books rarely dare to whisper about. Not the battles, not the emperors, not the grand palaces, but the hidden pleasure quarters that glowed behind silk curtains and moonlit alleys. Places where music drifted like warm breath, where lanterns held secrets instead of light, and where whispered poetry, forbidden longing, and quiet human truths shaped the night more deeply than any dynasty ever admitted. Tonight, you and I will wander softly through those forgotten streets. The tea houses where scholars escaped their own thoughts, the courtyards where dancers moved like water, the chambers where dreams, heartbreak, and hidden politics intertwined in shadows. We're not here to judge them. We're here to feel the pulse of a world that once lived, breathed, and disappeared, yet somehow still lingers in the corners of modern China. So before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if these deep sleep history stories help you find peace, sleep better, or simply reflect on our shared journey through time. Now, close your eyes and let the lanterns guide you. Tonight, before we step into the hidden pleasure quarters of ancient China, allow yourself a moment to breathe slowly, as if the night itself is exhaling with you. Imagine a city that no longer exists on any map, yet still lives in the dust of old scrolls and the quiet memory of palace walls. An ancient Chinese metropolis wrapped in lantern light and drifting shadows. The hour is deep. The sun has long folded itself behind the mountains, leaving only a faint silver line trembling on the horizon. In the streets below, the last shopkeepers are sliding wooden shutters closed with a gentle creak, creak, while somewhere far off, a lonely gong echoes across the rooftops to announce the arrival of night. A soft mist settles along the stone pathways, carrying the faint scent of plum blossoms and warm rice wine. And there, woven into the rhythm of this ancient city, you hear the soft tapping of wooden clogs, tuk, 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 echoing lightly, never hurried, as if each step belongs to someone who knows the secrets of the night better than the day. Lanterns sway above narrow alleys, their red silk skins glowing like small floating moons. Every flicker of flame paints a brief memory onto the walls. The curve of a silk sleeve, the shadow of a passing hand, the hushed whisper of a traveler asking for directions he pretends not to know. And in this gentle darkness lies a world hidden from the eyes of most, a world whispered about in poems, traced in ink by scholars, visited by nobles, merchants, poets, and lonely wanderers alike. This is the beginning of the pleasure quarters, not a place of loud revelry, nor a simple district of entertainment, but a realm where art, longing, music, and power intertwined so delicately that even the historians who tried to describe it often found their words dissolving into silence. Imagine yourself walking slowly beneath the lanterns. Each step is soft, like a brushstroke moving gently across silk. You are not rushing, you are not searching, you are simply drifting, following the quiet pull of curiosity that every night traveler once felt in these ancient streets. As you draw closer to the quarter, the energy of the city shifts. The night becomes warmer, softer, almost like velvet pressing lightly against your skin. From behind carved wooden screens, you hear the faint plucking of a peepaw, each note rising like a droplet of moonlight before fading into the mist. A woman's laugh, soft and unhurried, drifts through a slit in a paper window. Nearby, a poet is reciting lines to no one in particular, hoping the night air will carry his dream toward the right ears. In ancient China, these quarters were not merely spaces of physical pleasure. They were theaters of emotion, sanctuaries of fleeting connection, and stages where talent was displayed like rare jade. Courtesans were not simply companions, they were trained artists, skilled in conversation, poetry, music, the tea ceremony, and the quiet art of making a lonely heart feel seen. Some visitors came for desire, some came for music, others came for a taste of temporary escape, an evening where the responsibilities of rank, family, and reputation melted like incense smoke drifting toward the rafters. And as you stand at the threshold of this hidden world, you feel the quiet weight of history resting on your shoulders, not heavy, but familiar, like a hand guiding you gently forward. You are not here as a visitor. You are here as a listener, a dreamer, someone ready to drift between the shadows and stories that shaped the nights of a civilization thousands of years old. Take one more slow breath. Let the lantern glow settle into your chest. Tonight, the pleasure quarters are opening their doors for you. As you move deeper into the night-soaked streets, the city begins to quiet in a way that feels almost intentional, as if every sound is softening itself for your arrival. The glow of lanterns stretches longer across the path, pulling your attention toward a narrow corridor that bends like a secret being whispered. Along the wooden walls, thin cracks allow slivers of warm light to spill out, and for a brief moment, you catch a glimpse of a delicate hand adjusting a silk sleeve, then disappearing just as quickly. The pleasure quarters were never designed to be found by accident. They were places you approached slowly, respectfully, almost reverently, much like entering a shrine dedicated not to gods, but to humanity's softer, quieter desires. Imagine the door before you, carved from dark sandalwood, polished by thousands of hands yet still cool to the touch. A carved motif of plum blossoms winds around its frame, each petal capturing the flicker of candlelight from within. When you lift your hand and rest your fingertips against the grain, you feel not excitement, but a gentle invitation, as if generations of travelers once stood exactly where you stand now, hesitant but curious, tired yet longing for a moment of connection. Step inside with your breath steady and slow. The air shifts. It becomes warmer, scented with osmanthus flowers steeped in hot water, their fragrance rising like a soft sigh into the rafters. Curtains of embroidered silk swayed gently in the breeze that follows you in, and beyond them shapes move gracefully. Shadows of performers practicing, attendants preparing tea, courtesans adjusting hairpins made of jade, pearl, or openwork gold. Here, in this hidden world, everything moves with intention. Every motion is slower, every sound softened, every gesture shaped to soothe a restless mind. There are no sharp voices, no hurried footsteps. Even laughter is low and delicate, like water slipping across polished stones. You hear a guqin, its strings plucked so lightly that each note feels like a fingertip brushing across your thoughts. Nearby, someone is reading lines of poetry aloud, not to impress, but simply to let the words settle into the quiet space between breaths. In ancient China, the women who lived and worked in these quarters were more than entertainers. They were the guardians of refined culture, trained since childhood in the arts of elegance. They knew how to read a room with a single glance, how to steady a wandering mind with a simple question, how to pour tea in a way that made time feel slower, softer, safer. Stories tell us that even nobles and scholars would sometimes leave their scrolls behind and wander into these quarters seeking not indulgence, but clarity, hoping that a night spent in conversation with someone who understood the poetry of the moment might help untangle the knots in their hearts. And it wasn't only men who entered. Women, too, came seeking friendship, mentorship, inspiration. Within these walls, roles blurred, class blurred, even heartbreak blurred. What remained was simply the human desire to feel understood. Move further in. A woman in a pale blue robe glides past you, her steps feather light, her perfume drifting behind her like memory. Her eyes meet yours for just a breath-long second, not flirtatious, not bold, but knowing, as though she recognizes that you arrived carrying a quiet heaviness of your own. She does not speak, she does not need to. Her expression alone says, "You are safe here. You may rest." Ahead, the hall widens into a room filled with warm golden lanterns. Cushions embroidered in gold thread line the floor. A low table holds teacups the color of moonlit jade. And in this room, silence feels like a companion rather than an emptiness. You sit, you exhale, the night folds itself around you. This is not simply a pleasure quarter, it is a refuge, built for weary hearts, wandering souls, and dreamers who needed a place where time could slow down long enough for them to remember who they truly were. As you sit in the warm lantern glow, something shifts, not around you, but within you. as if the night has finally found the right place to rest inside your chest. The air is still, thick with the scent of sandalwood drifting from a bronze incense burner shaped like a prowling tiger. Its smoke rises in thin, deliberate curls, moving as slowly as a thought you haven't spoken yet. Across the room, a woman in a soft crimson robe is tuning a pipa. Her posture is effortless, like a watercolor figure who stepped out of a scroll painting and decided to breathe. Each time she plucks a string, the sound ripples toward you in warm circles, as though the music itself is trying to wrap you in comfort. She is not performing for applause. She is performing for the night, for the quiet, for the simple act of being present. In the pleasure quarters, music was never just entertainment. It was medicine for the restless heart. A single melody could soften grudges, unravel old memories, or help a wearied traveler forget the shadows he carried. Now imagine the curtains parting gently as a breeze wanders through the hall. Behind them, attendants light fresh candles, their flames catching on carved screens painted with peonies and cranes in flight. The golden light trembles, dances, then settles into a glow that feels almost protective. A server kneels beside you with a porcelain teacup. She pours a blend so delicate the steam rises like a thin veil, scented with chrysanthemum and a hint of honeyed jujube. You lift the cup. The warmth touches your hands first, then spreads slowly into your body, comforting your chest, loosening something tight that has been there for too long. This is how healing began here. Not with logic, not with advice, but with softness, with warmth, with someone creating a moment gentle enough for a tired soul to breathe differently. The courtesan in crimson finishes tuning her pipa. She looks at you with eyes calm enough to slow the world. Then she begins to speak, her voice low, smooth, carrying the rhythm of a lullaby hidden beneath every syllable. She talks not of love or longing, but of night itself, how it holds stories, how it hides the mistakes of the day, how it gives every traveler a chance to begin again when dawn returns. Her voice drifts across the room, weaving itself into the candlelight, blending with the lingering scent of osmanthus tea. Her words feel familiar, even though you've never heard them before. Perhaps because every ancient city had nights like this. Nights meant not for celebration, but for quiet mending. You look around the room again, and suddenly the purpose of these pleasure quarters becomes clear. This place was never just a sanctuary for desire. It was a sanctuary for exhaustion, a refuge for the heart, a haven where people could be honest with themselves in ways they never could outside those carved wooden doors. You hear footsteps behind you, soft, almost weightless. An older hostess approaches, her silver hair pinned with a jade ornament shaped like a crescent moon. Her smile is kind, in the way that only those who have seen many lives can be kind. She bows gently, then sits across from you. She doesn't ask your name, she doesn't ask your story. She simply observes you, with eyes that see far more than you say. "Here," she murmurs, her voice warm as lantern light. "You may set your burdens down." And somehow, you do. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet way a person finally loosens a knot they have been tightening for years. Outside, a nightbird calls once, then disappears into the sky. The incense burns lower, candles flicker softer, conversations dissolve into whispers, then into silence. The room becomes a cradle, and you, without meaning to, become part of the night's slow, rhythmic breathing. Here, in the hidden pleasure quarters of ancient China, the first chapter of your journey settles, not with passion, not with revelation, but with rest, with stillness, with the gentle reminder that even in a world ruled by emperors, scholars, merchants, and warriors, there was always a place where a tired traveler could simply be human again. Before the pleasure quarters became elaborate sanctuaries of music, poetry, and whispered dreams, their story began in simpler places. Places filled not with silk curtains and lantern-lit chambers, but with the earthy smell of roasted millet wine, damp wooden floors, and the laughter of travelers seeking warmth after long roads. Tonight, we drift back to the early centuries of the Han and Tang dynasties, when ancient Chinese cities swelled with merchants, scholars, soldiers, and wanderers who stitched distant provinces together through trade and stories. Imagine the outskirts of a bustling Han-era city. The sky is dimming, dust settling after a day of wheels and hooves grinding along the trade routes. A weary merchant approaches a roadside tavern, its sign creaking softly in the dusk breeze. Creak, creak. The tavern is nothing more than a humble wooden shack, but its doorway spills warm amber light onto the dirt road, and inside, voices hum like a gentle hive. Travelers sit hunched over steaming bowls of noodles, wiping rain from their sleeves, exchanging tales of mountain passes and unpredictable rivers. This tavern, like many across the empire, is where everything began. Not because men sought pleasure, but because they sought rest, safety, companionship. A reminder that even on the longest road, humanity waited somewhere with a warm fire and a place to sit. Over time, these taverns grew. Some added small rooms for sleeping. Others hired musicians, flute players who traveled lightly, carrying nothing but their instruments and a handful of memories. A few taverns even welcomed storytellers who spoke of forbidden romances, distant wars, and spirits who lived between moonbeams. And slowly, the purpose of these spaces shifted. What began as rest stops transformed into pockets of nightly refuge, where strangers could forget their burdens for a few hours. As cities expanded during the Tang dynasty, golden age of poetry, painting, and opulence, the taverns, tea houses, and roadside inns began gathering closer together, forming clusters that pulsed with after-dark life. Roads that once led only to the marketplace now branched into other streets unmarked on official maps, yet known by every traveler seeking music, laughter, or a moment of company. One such traveler, a silk merchant named Qian, appears often in old anecdotes. The story says that after 20 days of journeying through rain-soaked valleys, Qian's clothes were caked with mud, and his voice was coarse from calling out to mule drivers along the road. Tired beyond measure, he arrived at a small tea stall on the edge of Chang'an just as night was settling. The owner, a gentle woman with silver-streaked hair, handed him a bowl of hot chrysanthemum tea and whispered, "If you seek rest, true rest, walk down the alley where the lanterns burn a softer red." Qian, half asleep and aching, followed her instructions, and there, in a narrow lane he later swore had not existed on the map, he found a street lined with low wooden houses. Music floated out from shuttered windows. The scent of wineberry and sandalwood curled in the air. A girl in a pale green robe swept dust from her doorstep and smiled at him as if she had been expecting him all along. Qian stayed only one night, yet for the rest of his life he wrote that he had discovered a place where the world removed its armor. That alley, unnamed and unmarked, would later be recognized as one of the earliest pleasure quarters of Chang'an. And Qian was only one of thousands who stumbled across such places, not by intent, but by need. These early quarters were not built for decadence. They were built for the weary, for those too burdened by travel, duty, or silence to face the night alone. With time, these modest clusters of taverns and tea houses began weaving themselves into the fabric of major cities, Beijing, Luoyang, Yangzhou, and transformed into vibrant districts where art, comfort, and human longing intertwined. But their beginnings, their roots, always went back to the same simple truth. Someone tired needed somewhere soft to land. And so the world created it. As the great cities of the Tang dynasty flourished, the transformation of simple taverns into early pleasure districts unfolded almost naturally, like a lantern's flame widening inside a paper shell. Chang'an, Luoyang, and Yangzhou became vibrant crossroads of culture, where caravans from Persia, Sogdia, and Central Asia brought not only silk and spices, but also new rhythms of music, new ideas of leisure, and new kinds of evening companionship. Imagine Chang'an at twilight, the grandest capital the world had ever seen. Its streets stretch in perfect grid-like precision, but as the last beams of sun slip behind the city walls, order gives way to softness. Merchants securing their stalls begin to lower bamboo blinds. Bakers pulled the final trays of steaming buns from their ovens, and along side streets the first lamps flicker awake, small blooming suns that signal the beginning of night's quieter pulse. At the edge of the eastern market, a row of tea houses begins to hum gently. These are no longer the humble taverns of earlier centuries. They have polished wooden counters, shelves lined with porcelain jars, and attendants trained to pour tea with a grace so fluid it seems more like a performance than a service. Musicians arrive after sunset. One carries a ruan, another a bamboo flute aged dark with use, Another, a small drum covered with thin leather from river fish, so the sound is soft enough not to disturb neighbors. The music they play is not boisterous. It is meant to soothe, to slow the world, to help the listener loosen the grip of the day. Slowly, these establishments begin to cluster, not by design, but by gravity, as though human longing had its own magnetic pull. One tea house hires a storyteller. Another hires two sisters known for their harmonized singing. A third becomes famous for its rice wine steeped with plum blossoms, so fragrant that customers swear they can still smell it on their sleeves long after leaving. And without anyone planning it, a street transforms. What was once a collection of unrelated shops becomes a small universe, each doorway offering a different flavor of solace. Travelers begin spreading rumors. There is a lane in Chang'an, they say, where the night feels kinder. Among the many stories preserved in old diaries, there is one about a young scholar named Shen. He had failed the imperial examination 3 times, each failure heavier than the last. Ashamed to return home, he wandered into Chang'an with only a few coins and an even fewer number of hopes. One evening, after hours of walking the main market, he found himself at a narrow street where lanterns flickered in deeper shades of red, more subdued, more welcoming, as if painted by the night itself. Shen hesitated, thinking it was a private area, but an old man sweeping the entrance said, "If your heart is heavy, child, you belong here as much as anyone." Inside, Shen found a world that seemed designed for someone exactly like him. Women in soft robes sat with visitors, not to flirt, but to listen. A musician played a tune that reminded Shen of the river behind his childhood home. A kindly hostess brewed him tea fragrant with osmanthus, and when she noticed the ink stains on his sleeves, she placed a scroll beside him and said, "Write here where no one will judge the shaking of your hands." That night, Shen wrote until the candles burned low, not for an exam, not for glory, but for the simple relief of letting unspoken thoughts become ink. Decades later, he would become a respected poet, and in one of his surviving verses, he wrote, "I found my voice in a place the map forgot." Many such voices were born in these early pleasure quarters, not from passion, but from refuge, not from excess, but from gentleness. These places nourished weary spirits long before they became associated with opulence. And it was here, between tea steam, soft music, and lantern-lit faces, that the foundation of China's legendary entertainment districts quietly took shape. As the decades slipped forward like silk sliding through the hands of time, the clusters of taverns, tea houses, and roadside inns continued to evolve, not through sudden change, but through a slow weaving of human need and urban rhythm. What began as humble resting places gradually learned the language of the night. They grew more attentive, more atmospheric, more aware of the unspoken longings carried by those who drifted through their doors. In many cities, the streets that held these establishments began forming a new identity. They became known not only as places to drink or rest, but as floating worlds, realms where time felt suspended and where burdens dissolved as quietly as incense smoke. Lanterns multiplied, music softened, curtains thickened, and slowly these places shed the roughness of their origins and acquired a gentler, more intentional beauty. In Yangsu, a city famous for its canals and moonlit bridges, legend tells of a courtyard inn run by an aging couple. They had once traveled as performers themselves. He, a storyteller with a deep voice meant for moonlit nights. She, a musician whose guchen melodies could coax even the most anxious heart into stillness. Together, they transformed their modest inn into a sanctuary for travelers. They planted fragrant magnolia trees at the entrance so that returning visitors could recognize the scent long before seeing the lanterns. They filled the main hall with embroidered cushions, low tables carved with river motifs, and small clay burners that released a scent of sandalwood and orange peel. One evening, a young widow arrived, soaked with rain and trembling with exhaustion after days of travel. She had fled her village after political turmoil left her home unsafe, carrying only a bundle of clothes and a sealed letter whose contents she was afraid to read. The innkeepers welcomed her in silence. They dried her cloak by the fire, brewed her a cup of sweet ginger tea, and ensured her room was warmed before she entered. That night, she slept for the first time in weeks. When she woke, she said the place felt like being held by someone I no longer remembered. Stories like hers spread far beyond Yangsu's canals. Travelers whispered to each other, "There are streets in the empire where the night understands you." These whispers attracted new kinds of artisans, painters who sought quiet corners to observe human nature, poets searching for inspiration, musicians longing for appreciative listeners, and performers who carried with them traditions from distant provinces. Slowly, these neighborhoods became ecosystems of creativity. A storyteller might share a tale that inspired a musician to compose a new melody. A courtesan, trained in conversation and charm, might guide a scholar through his heartbreak with a single evening of thoughtful listening. A dancer might move in a way that helped a lonely traveler remember the warmth of home. In time, these interwoven talents gave birth to establishments that were no longer simple taverns or inns. They became houses of cultivated entertainment, places where art, emotion, and companionship blended seamlessly. They were no longer the raw beginnings of a street. They were the earliest true pleasure quarters. Yet, for all their beauty, their purpose remained the same: to give the weary a place to soften, to let them forget the rigid etiquette of the outside world, to offer temporary shelter from ambition, obligation, and sorrow, and perhaps most importantly, to allow people, regardless of status, wealth, or origin, to feel human in a world that demanded so much composure. As night deepened in these quarters, streets glowed with red and gold lanterns. Shadows of performers danced behind paper screens. Laughter mingled with poetry recitations drifting from open windows, and the river of travelers, merchants, scholars, wanderers, women running from grief, men returning from war, flowed through these districts like quiet tributaries seeking a warm sea. Thus, without proclamations or grand designs, the earliest pleasure quarters grew from simple places of refuge into havens of delicate artistry and human connection. The world outside changed with dynasties, but these quarters remained constant, soft lamps in the shifting darkness of history. Before the pleasure quarters became shimmering labyrinths of lantern light and whispered desires, they first revealed themselves through gentler places, tea houses and song halls that floated like pearls on the surface of ancient city nights. These were not brothels, not dens of indulgence. They were rooms of culture, of refinement, of carefully crafted atmosphere, places where elegance lived in every breath of steam rising from a porcelain cup. Tonight, we step quietly into one of these early tea houses, an oasis of calm carved into the lively maze of Tang-era Chang'an. As you push aside the silk curtain, the world outside melts behind you. The air grows warm. The scent of roasted oolong drifts upward like a memory that refuses to fade. Somewhere deeper inside, a peepaw strings its first trembling note, soft, circular, tender, like a fingertip brushing gently across the edge of the night. Imagine the interior, lacquered wood polished to a gentle shine, low tables arranged like stepping stones across a pond of woven mats, lanterns breathing slow amber light into the corners, silk screens painted with cranes, plums, and drifting clouds create small pockets of privacy, not to hide secrets, but to soften them. Customers here do not shout. They do not bargain. They settle into the hush as though the hush is the true host. Tea attendants glide quietly between tables, their long sleeves trailing behind like pale rivers. They pour tea the way a poet chooses words, slowly, thoughtfully, balancing heat, fragrance, and silence. In these tea houses, pleasure was not taken, it was invited. It lived in the warmth of the cup, the curve of a melody, the shy laughter that rose when someone recited a line of poetry incorrectly on purpose just to lighten the mood. Beside the tea houses rose another kind of sanctuary, the song halls, known in poems as places where the night remembers. These halls were filled with music, flutes shaped like hollow moonbeams, ruan drums soft as heartbeat, and peepaw notes that landed on the skin like falling petals. Here, performers were not merely entertainers, they were artisans of emotional comfort. Courtesans trained in verse, calligraphy, and storytelling moved with the same refined grace as court dancers. Their presence added warmth, not tension. Their laughter was gentle enough to steady the room, and their conversations, light, teasing, thoughtful, often carried more solace than any drink. It was in these places that scholars, officials, and wanderers found what their daily lives denied them, the freedom to feel human without armor. Some came to listen, Some came to forget. Others came to be reminded that beauty still lived somewhere in the world, even when their days were choked with duty. The tea house was often seen as a cultural salon, a place where the boundaries between artistry and nightlife blurred in incandescent harmony. Poets shared unfinished verses, chess players whispered strategies, musicians tuned their instruments with the same meticulous care a monk devotes to lighting a prayer candle. And among the many stories whispered through the centuries, one tells of the famous poet Bai Juyi. Though known for his political candor and lyrical mastery, he was also a gentle frequenter of such refined halls, not for scandal, but for sanctuary. One evening, exhausted from palace duties, Bai Juyi wandered into a modest tea house near the Pearl Market. A young musician quietly played the pipa in the corner, shaping each note as if sculpting moonlight. Bai Juyi sat, listened, and wrote a single line on a scrap of paper. Some nights need only one melody to lift the weight of 10,000 thoughts. The line was never published, but the story survived because the tea attendant tucked the paper into her sleeve and told it to her daughter, who told it to her granddaughter, until it became part of legend. Tea houses and song halls were like that. Places where stories lived softly, where beauty traveled from one generation to the next, not through books, but through breath. And in these quiet sanctuaries, the earliest shape of the pleasure quarters shimmered to life, not through desire, but through delicacy, not through excess, but through grace.
As you settle deeper into the gentle atmosphere of these refined tea houses and song halls, the night begins to take on a different shape. It becomes less of a backdrop and more of a companion, a quiet listener sitting beside you, attentive to every breath of music, every whisper of steam rising from the teacup between your palms. In these places, pleasure was subtle. It was woven not from desire, but from tenderness, from the soft meeting points of warmth, beauty, and conversation. Each tea house had its own personality. Some were built around inner courtyards where moonlight rested on stone pathways like spilled silver. Others were hidden behind modest facades, known only to poets and musicians who whispered invitations to those they trusted. Inside, the world glowed gently. Candles flickered behind patterned screens, casting silhouettes of cranes and lotus flowers. The soft clack of wooden go-pieces sounded like distant raindrops. And always there was music. Music that didn't demand attention, but welcomed it, slipping into the heart like water seeping into thirsty earth. Many scholars visited these places not for entertainment, but for revival. After days of wrestling with calligraphy strokes or memorizing ancient texts, they found solace here, where conversations drifted like slow river currents, and every sound felt softened by intention. A favorite pastime in these halls was poetry exchange. A guest might recite 2 tentative lines, and someone across the room, perhaps a courtesan trained in verse, would finish the couplet with a flourish so delicate it drew murmurs of delight. One evening in Luoyang, it is said that a courtesan named Fei Yan sat beside a young official who struggled to complete a poem he'd been drafting for months. The poem described longing, but his words lacked the tenderness he felt. Fei Yan, sensing his frustration, placed a single jasmine blossom on the table, its fragrance filling the air. "Write," she said softly, "not from the mind, but from the place where longing begins." The official lowered his gaze, breathed in the scent, and within minutes, ink flowed across the page. Years later, that poem became one of his most famous works. Fei Yan's name never appeared beside it, yet those who knew whispered that she was its true muse. Song halls, on the other hand, were sanctuaries of sound. A single peepah player could command the room with a melody that curled like smoke around every listener. Some songs were bright and playful, dancing like lantern reflections on water. Others were slow, melancholy, threading through the mind like forgotten memories returning home. A well-known story tells of the young poet Li He, whose imagination roamed far beyond the boundaries of ordinary verse. One night, overwhelmed by the palace's expectations, he wandered into a modest song hall tucked behind a line of cypress trees. A girl dressed in soft lavender was singing, a melody so fragile it felt like it might dissolve if someone breathed too loudly. Li He stood in the doorway, motionless, listening. When the song ended, he whispered, "Your voice is the shadow of the moon on trembling water." The girl smiled, not with vanity, but with recognition. She invited him inside, poured him jasmine tea, and the two spent the night exchanging stories of dreams they feared to speak aloud elsewhere. It was said that several of Li He's later poems, those with lines about drifting spirits and moonlit bridges, were born from that single evening. Tea houses and song halls were woven from countless such encounters, small, intimate moments that left traces on the lives they touched. None were grand, none were scandalous, but each was a quiet turning point, a soft realignment of a weary heart. And it was in these subtle exchanges, these offerings of beauty, voice, and understanding, that the cultural soul of the pleasure quarters blossomed. These places taught people how to rest without guilt, how to feel deeply without fear, and how to let the night cradle them in its gentle, unhurried hands.
As the night deepened across ancient Chinese cities, tea houses and song halls transformed into something far more profound than evening entertainment. They became sanctuaries of culture, places where the boundaries between art, emotion, and human longing dissolved into a serene, dreamlike blend. Many who visited these refined establishments were not seeking indulgence, but resonance, a quiet reminder that beauty was still within reach, even after long days burdened with expectations. Every corner of these halls carried intention. The silk drapes hung just heavy enough to soften the lantern glow. The polished wood smelled faintly of cedar and thyme, and the air, always warm, always fragrant, held whispers of jasmine steam, sandalwood smoke, and the delicate sweetness of osmanthus drifting from open teapots. In this world of gentle sounds and shadows, conversations were the true currency. Unlike the loud banter of markets or the rigid discourse of court halls, conversations here flowed with tenderness. They drifted like poetry recited under a half moon. They wandered softly between laughter, vulnerability, and comfortable silence. Musicians understood this. Their melodies were crafted not to impress, but to accompany, like gentle footsteps walking beside a weary traveler. A single pipa note could melt the tension from a scholar's shoulders. A flute could slow a restless heartbeat. A guqin chord could make an old grief feel less sharp, less lonely. It was in these serene interactions that the intellectual spirit of the pleasure quarters emerged. Tea houses became informal academies where scholars debated metaphors with courtesans skilled enough to complete their verses. Song halls became poetic stages where emotion was allowed to breathe. And for many, these spaces became the only refuge where they could shed the heavy armor of societal duty and simply be human, not judged by rank, not measured by accomplishment, but welcomed by presence alone. Among the stories whispered through generations, one speaks of the poet Wen Tingyun, whose verses were filled with longing, romance, and moonlit melancholy. His poems were notorious for capturing the delicate emotions of courtesans, their small hopes, their quiet heartbreaks, the grace they carried even in loneliness. Legend says Wen Tingyun spent many nights in a modest song hall near the southern gate of Chang'an. It was not an extravagant place. Its charm lay in subtlety, in its warm lanterns, its soft-spoken attendants, and the singer who often performed barefoot on a woven mat, her voice floating through the room like silk carried on wind. One evening, as Wen Tingyun struggled to complete a poem, the singer noticed his troubled expression. Without speaking, she sat beside him and hummed a slow, winding melody. Her voice rose and fell like ripples across a quiet lake. And in that moment, the missing lines came to him. He wrote them quickly, ink flowing like a river finally freed from stone. Later he would say, "She did not give me words, she gave me the silence they needed to be heard." This was the essence of the pleasure quarters' cultural salons, not passion but presence, not indulgence but understanding, not noise but stillness. And in their stillness, countless poems were born, countless hearts were soothed, and countless travelers found a brief place to breathe before returning to the demands of daylight. These refined establishments became the glowing surface above the deeper, more complex world of the pleasure quarters. They were the visible petals of a much larger blossom, soft, fragrant, elegant, hinting at the intricate human stories blooming beneath. As we leave this chapter behind, imagine once more the soft lantern glow, the trembling pipa notes, the scent of warm jasmine tea rising in the quiet. These were not merely places of escape, they were sanctuaries of the soul, where night held the weary and beauty whispered gently to anyone willing to listen.
Before we step further into the quiet elegance of ancient China's pleasure quarters, we must turn gently toward their hidden interior, the world behind the silk curtains,
the world the public rarely saw, the world where daily life unfolded like a long, unhurried sigh. Inside these houses, everything followed a structure, not ruled by law, but by tradition, by survival, and by the delicate balance between art and necessity. Imagine a morning inside one of these houses. Dawn has not yet broken, but the corridors already glow with the dim amber of oil lamps. The air is cool. The wooden floors whisper beneath soft footsteps as attendants begin their day. At the center of this quiet world stands the matron, the house mistress. She is neither cruel nor indulgent, but someone carved by time itself. Her hair is pinned tightly with jade, her robe simple but dignified, and her eyes carry the calm weight of years spent navigating the fragile lives of the women under her roof. She oversees everything, not with shouts, but with a steady gaze, a slight nod, a soft word. Under her guidance, the hierarchy of the house begins to awaken. The senior courtesans, those trained in refinement, poetry, conversation, and music, rise first. They begin their morning not with leisure, but with quiet preparation. They wash their faces in warm water scented with chrysanthemum petals, comb their hair with slow, practiced strokes, and begin applying the pale powder and soft rouge that have become signatures of their craft. Each step is ritual. Each movement is memory. Beside them are the younger girls, the apprentices, who have not yet earned the right to sit among guests. Some were sold into the trade by families drowning in debt. Some were orphans with nowhere else to go. Others were handed over by relatives who believed the girls would at least have food and safety here. Their mornings begin earlier, with sweeping, washing, preparing tea, tuning instruments, and assisting the older women in their routines. There is fatigue in their eyes, yes, but also an unspoken resilience, a knowledge that this house, for better or worse, is now their world. In the courtyard, musicians tune their instruments. The pipa's strings vibrate softly like the first breath of dawn. A guqin rests on a low table, awaiting the fingers that will coax stories from its strings. A flute player sits beneath a magnolia tree, testing small phrases of melody until the notes blend seamlessly with the morning air. These musicians are not servants. They are respected artisans, often hired from nearby districts, sometimes living within the house itself. Their role is not merely to entertain guests, but to shape the emotional atmosphere of the day. As the sun finally begins to rise, the house shifts into the rhythm of practice. In one room, a courtesan repeats a poem again and again, her voice soft and steady. In another, a young girl struggles with her calligraphy strokes, ink pooling too heavily on the page. A senior woman passes by and gently corrects her grip, not with criticism, but with encouragement. Across the hall, someone practices dance movements. A slow turn, a lifted sleeve, a step as delicate as a falling petal. These gestures are not for seduction. They are for storytelling. They are pieces of ancient theater woven into the most intimate corners of night. And yet, beneath all this grace lies a deeper truth. Not every woman here chose this path. Some dream of escape. Some dream of a benefactor's kindness. Some dream simply of a life where they belong to no one. But there are also stories of triumph. Courtesans who rose to fame through their talent, whose poetry was quoted by officials, whose music drew noble guests from far provinces, whose names became legends whispered in candle-lit halls. This world was complex, layered, shaped by sorrow and beauty in equal measure. And every morning, as the house awakened, the women who lived within it carried both with them, their burdens and their brilliance, moving through the day like lantern light swaying in a gentle wind.
As the morning ripens into a soft, golden calm, the rhythm inside the pleasure house becomes more intricate, like a tapestry slowly revealing patterns hidden beneath its first threads. The women move through their routines with a grace shaped by years of repetition, but also by a quiet resilience born from lives that had taken unexpected turns, sometimes harsh, sometimes strangely hopeful. By mid-morning, the house reaches its most serene hour. The bustle of early chores fades, and a slow hush settles over the rooms like a warm shawl. Courtesans gather in the main hall to rehearse music or practice refined arts. A senior woman, known as a flower mother, guides the younger girls, teaching them posture, diction, the subtle poise required to hold conversations with guests who expect elegance, but also sincerity. These lessons are not merely training, they are survival. Inside the house, manners can determine destiny. Talent could elevate someone from obscurity to renown. A single poem recited perfectly might capture the admiration of a visiting scholar. A single melody played with trembling softness might earn stability for a month. Meanwhile, the mistress of the house moves through the corridors like a shadow shaped by purpose. She listens more than she speaks. She watches the subtle dynamics. Who struggles? Who excels? Who hides their fear behind a practiced smile? Who has begun to wither? Who has begun to bloom? Her role is part guardian, part strategist. She must protect the women from harm, but she must also ensure the house survives. Guests will arrive in the evening. Reputation must be preserved. The balance between comfort and profit must be carefully tended. And so, every afternoon becomes a quiet preparation for the night. In one room, a courtesan sews a tear in her silk sleeve, her fingers moving with habitual precision. In another, a girl practices pouring tea with grace, letting the stream of liquid fall in a perfect thread that does not splash. Across the courtyard, two musicians rehearse a duet, pipa and bamboo flute,
intertwining like drifting smoke. Their harmonies echo across the wooden beams, soft enough not to disturb, strong enough to remind everyone of the approaching dusk. Yet beneath these ordinary motions lie lives shaped by circumstance. Many women arrived here through the weight of debt. A father owed money he could not repay. A brother gambled away the family's savings. A storm destroyed the crops. And sometimes the decision was made by others, elders who believed that selling a daughter into a reputable house was kinder than starving. But once inside, the paths diverged. Some women discovered talent they never knew they possessed, voices that trembled with beauty, hands that spoke poetry across a Guichin strings, minds that could match a scholar's wit. These women might rise, gaining admirers, patrons, a fragile sort of fame that softened their days. Their names were whispered in garden banquets, their performances remembered across provinces. Yet just as many lived quiet lives, girls who blended into the soft shadows of hallways, who served tea, carried instruments, prepared costumes, and rarely stepped onto the center stage. Their dreams were quieter, simpler, a safe place to sleep, a warm meal, a moment of peace in a world that had given them little choice. And within this mixture of brilliance and sorrow, the house breathed. It pulsed with the hopes and fears of dozens of women whose lives intersected under its roof, each carrying a story that would never appear in the official histories. Some were stories of survival, some of longing, some of small victories that shimmered briefly before fading into the folds of memory. By late afternoon, preparations near their end. The house falls into a momentary stillness. Hair has been styled, robes have been selected. Crimson, lavender, pale green, each chosen to complement a woman's features or the atmosphere of the evening. Instruments rest on stands awaiting nightfall, and the women, each shaped by hardship, talent, resilience, take a quiet breath before stepping into the twilight, where they will become performers, companions, listeners, storytellers. For now, though, they remain suspended in that soft golden pause, a moment when the world holds its breath just long enough to let them feel human.
As twilight gently settles across the city, the pleasure house begins its transformation. The quiet diligence of morning and afternoon gives way to a softer, humming anticipation. Lanterns are lit one by one, their warm glow blooming like flowers along the corridors. Silk curtains breathe as the evening breeze drifts in, carrying the faint scent of night-blooming jasmine. This is the hour when the house exhales, stretching its limbs after a long day of silent preparation. For the women within, the shift is delicate, almost ceremonial. They exchange the muted robes of daytime for flowing garments of silk, crimson, ivory, moonlit blue, each chosen not simply for beauty, but for the story it whispers. A woman with a quiet heart may wear pale green, like early spring mist. One known for bold wit may choose deep red, a color that glows even in candlelight. Hair is adorned with jade pins, pearls, or simple wooden combs, depending on rank and experience. Even these details speak a language: elegance without arrogance, allure without demand. In the main hall, the mistress of the house gathers everyone with a calm nod. She says very little. She doesn't need to. Her presence alone steadies the air. She has guided these women through countless evenings, through good nights and difficult ones, through moments of triumph and moments of heartbreak, and she will guide them again now. As the first guests arrive, the atmosphere remains controlled, respectful, intimate. Guests remove their shoes at the entrance. They are greeted not with the brash laughter found in taverns, but with soft smiles, gentle bows, and the low hum of pipa strings preparing the room for conversation. A senior courtesan steps forward to host the first group of visitors. Her movements are measured, serene, as though she is flowing rather than walking. She pours tea with the precision of a calligrapher, her whisk turning with subtle elegance, her sleeves falling in gentle arcs. Her goal is not to seduce, but to soothe, to create a quiet place where the burdens of the outside world may loosen, even if for only an evening. In another room, a pair of musicians begins a slow duet. The guqin hums like a deep river under moonlight, while the bamboo flute drifts above it, soft, wandering, wistful. The notes weave through the hallways, settling gently on the hearts of guests and attendants alike. It is in moments like this that the humanity of the house reveals itself most clearly. Behind every practiced gesture lies a personal history, some heavy, some hopeful. One courtesan may once have been the daughter of a merchant who lost everything. Another may have been a village girl sent away after a bad harvest. One may dream of buying her freedom. One may dream of falling in love. One may simply dream of rest. Their stories are rarely told, yet they shape the atmosphere of the night. They give weight to the softness, depth to the music, truth to the smiles. And sometimes a guest senses this humanity in unexpected ways. A wandering scholar may pause during a conversation, struck not by a courtesan's beauty, but by the intelligence behind her eyes. A weary traveler may find comfort in the calm voice of a woman who has learned to speak gently because she herself has known sorrow. And occasionally, quietly, a friendship forms, not a romance, not an infatuation, but a small, steady warmth between two people who meet on equal ground for just a moment, sharing stories that neither will repeat in the daylight. Nights like these are the reason some women endure this life with dignity, because within the rituals, the hierarchy, and the hardships, there are tiny sparks of connection. Moments when they are not commodities, not performers, but human beings seen clearly and kindly. As the evening deepens, laughter mingles with the rustling of silk sleeves. Lantern light flickers across wooden floors. Somewhere, a courtesan sings a quiet melody about longing and moonlit rivers. Somewhere else, a shy apprentice practices pouring tea for the 20th time. And in the small hours of the night, When the last guest leaves and the corridors return to silence, the women shed their layered personas, one ribbon, one hairpin, one sigh at a time. They breathe again. They return to themselves. For some, tonight was merely another night. For others, it was a night that will linger, softly, like a fingerprint left on the surface of a dream.
Before we move further into the human stories of the pleasure quarters, we must pause and drift into a quieter, more cerebral space. The world of rules, taxes, prohibitions, and moral contradictions that shaped these districts from dynasty to dynasty. This chapter is softer, slower, filled with the calm weight of historical reflection. A perfect lull for the mind preparing for sleep. Imagine the long arc of Chinese history stretching across the centuries, a cycle of rise and fall, of order and disorder, of laws written and unwritten. Within this arc, the pleasure quarters existed in a strange twilight. They were never fully accepted, never fully condemned. Instead, they lived in the gray zone between human desire and state control. Under the Han Dynasty, the government understood the existence of such quarters, but treated them like shadows, acknowledged yet kept at a polite distance. Taxes were collected quietly. Regulations existed, but softly, like guidelines rather than iron chains. And yet moral writings of the time spoke sternly of restraint, urging officials to avoid indulgence. But those same officials, after long days of bureaucracy and travel, frequently slipped through lantern-lit alleys seeking conversation, poetry, and warmth. Then came the Tang Dynasty, a golden age of arts and poetry. The pleasure quarters blossomed, especially in Chang'an and Luang. Here, the state attempted a more structured approach. Registers were created. House mistresses were required to report the number of women under their roof. Certain districts were designated as entertainment zones to keep these activities contained. But at the same time, Tang poetry is full of imagery taken directly from these very places. Courtesans playing pipa by moonlit windows, scholars wandering through willow-lined streets, wandering poets comparing lantern glow to falling stars. The law said, "Do not linger," but culture said, "How else can one understand the human heart?" And so the contradiction deepened. By the Song Dynasty, the government became even more systematic. Brothels were categorized. Fees and taxes were standardized. Some cities even had official red light streets that appeared on administrative maps. Yet the stricter the regulations, the more frequently Song scholars visited these quarters, writing long reflective essays about the courtesans they met, analyzing their conversations, documenting their lives. Moralists condemned, the economy benefited, officials lectured, officials visited. A dance of hypocrisy that repeated itself for centuries. Confucian teachings taught self-discipline, restraint, and moral purity. But Confucianism also emphasized the complexity of human nature, emotion, longing, loneliness. The state invoked Confucian virtue to restrict the pleasure quarters. The people invoked Confucian empathy to justify them. And in the space between those two interpretations, the houses continued to survive. Never legal enough to be celebrated, never illegal enough to disappear. Even during periods of harsh prohibition, such as certain years of the Ming dynasty, when edicts demanded houses to close and women to return home, enforcement was inconsistent. Local officials often turned a blind eye, especially in port cities where merchants arrived exhausted from long sea voyages. Money spoke louder than morality. Need spoke louder than doctrine. And desire, so deeply woven into human existence, whispered through every era with the same quiet persistence. Yet the pleasure quarters were not simply tolerated. They were managed, controlled, negotiated. They mirrored the politics of their time, becoming stricter during eras of strong central government, more relaxed during times of economic prosperity, and nearly invisible during periods of war. Through it all, they remained a paradox, forbidden yet frequented, condemned yet indispensable, morally criticized yet economically woven into the life of cities. A place where the state tried to define the boundaries of virtue, while individuals quietly redefined the boundaries of humanity. And as night settles deeper into this chapter, you may notice something soothing in these contradictions, something rhythmic, something deeply, quietly human. The pleasure quarters survived not because the law allowed them, nor because morality approved them, but because they existed in the same fragile space where all human needs reside, between restraint and longing, between duty and desire, between who we are expected to be and who we secretly are.
To understand why the pleasure quarters survived for so many centuries, despite laws, prohibitions, and shifting moral climates, we must look deeper into the intricate machinery of the state. Ancient China was built on cycles of control and release, of tightening and loosening, of stern public virtue and quiet private need. The pleasure quarters existed within these cycles like a tide that never fully receded. Consider the bureaucratic lens of the imperial state. To the government, these districts were simultaneously a moral concern, a social pressure valve, and an economic tool. And because the state was never a single voice, but a chorus of officials with differing views, the policies toward these quarters fluctuated constantly. Some governors believed strict morality was necessary to preserve social order. They issued edicts condemning places of idle pleasure, urging citizens to avoid them, and warning women against participating. But enforcement was always uneven. In wealthier regions, taxes collected from the pleasure houses contributed substantially to local revenue. Officials knew this, and many quietly preferred regulation over eradication. That contradiction shaped entire eras. During the Song dynasty, for instance, the state recognized that eliminating the pleasure quarters entirely would destabilize urban economies, and so they adopted a paradoxical model: moral condemnation paired with administrative integration. Brothels were monitored, courtesans were registered, taxes were standardized, curfews were imposed. Yet the very same government also sponsored festivals,
trade fairs, and cultural events that inevitably increased demand for entertainment. It was as though the state itself existed in two realities, one idealistic, one pragmatic, and the pleasure quarters occupied the space where those two realities collided. This gray zone was further complicated by Confucian ideology. Confucianism carried two intertwined threads, righteousness and empathy. The righteous thread demanded discipline, self-control, and moral uprightness, but the empathetic thread understood loneliness, sorrow, longing, and the fragile human heart. Officials often argued from righteousness during the day, demanding purity and restraint, but at night many moved quietly through willow-lined alleys, guided by empathy, for themselves, for their burdens, for the need to feel understood after long days of protocol and political tension. In this contradiction, the pleasure quarters became mirrors, reflecting the inner complexity of human beings. Meanwhile, another layer shaped the grayness of this world, the relationship between merchants and governance. Merchants were essential to the prosperity of cities. They brought goods from distant provinces, boosted market activity, and sustained urban growth. After months of travel through mountains and rivers, these merchants sought warmth, music, companionship, and rest. Local officials knew this, and so even when prohibitions stiffened, ports and commercial capitals often maintained a softer stance. A thriving pleasure quarter meant a thriving economy, and a thriving economy meant political stability. Thus, behind closed doors, moral condemnations softened into toleration. Beyond economic logic, there was also the matter of human psychology. The pleasure quarters functioned as pressure valves, places where people released the tension accumulated from rigid social structures. Scholars who spent years memorizing classics sought relief from mental exhaustion. Officials burdened by endless duties sought a moment of warmth. Wanderers sought the simple comfort of being listened to. These human needs did not vanish because the law demanded virtue. Laws could punish actions, but they could not extinguish longing. And so the pleasure quarters adapted. They shifted form depending on the dynasty. When restrictions grew severe, establishments moved behind closed gates. When regulations relaxed, districts blossomed openly. When taxes increased, houses raised their standards. When crackdowns began, they rebranded themselves as music houses or tea academies, allowing them to operate while appearing harmless. Through all this, one thing remained constant. The pleasure quarters survived by being fluid, by drifting between definitions, by existing in the liminal spaces that law could not neatly categorize. And as you drift deeper into the soft night of this chapter, perhaps you can feel the rhythm of these contradictions, not sharp or disturbing, but soothing, like waves reshaping the shore, a reminder that humanity lives not in absolutes, but in the quiet spaces between them.
So, as we wander deeper into the moral landscape surrounding the pleasure quarters, the contradictions become softer, almost meditative, like watching ripples move across a still pond. Nothing is absolute here. Everything lives in gradients, in quiet negotiations between ethics, economics,
and human longing. And this, more than anything, is why the subject feels so hypnotic. In many ways, the pleasure quarters reflected the inner conflict of Chinese society itself. Confucian teachings emphasized social harmony, filial piety, and virtuous conduct. But these teachings also acknowledged the emotional dimension of life, the fragility of the heart, the inevitability of longing, the importance of compassion. It was this tension between ideal behavior and lived experience that created the gray zone in which the pleasure quarters existed. Even emperors wrestled with this contradiction. Some issued strict decrees condemning immoral behavior. Others enjoyed poetry, music, and refined entertainment in their private halls. The court chroniclers rarely wrote about these contradictions directly, yet the signs were always there, in scattered poems, in palace anecdotes, in the soft euphemisms used to describe evening festivities. The public rhetoric was clear: restraint, purity, discipline. The private reality was gentler: loneliness, curiosity, and the desire to escape the weight of responsibility, if only for a night. Officials who spent their days preaching morality often spent their nights debating philosophy with courtesans who were themselves well-read and artistically trained. Scholars who lectured others on virtue would write wistful moonlit poems about encounters in the very places they publicly condemned. And merchants who claimed to be devout patrons of propriety kept careful track of which entertainment houses offered the best music, the best wine, the best conversation. It was not hypocrisy, not entirely. It was something quieter, more human. The acknowledgement that ideals are guiding stars, but the heart lives closer to the earth. Laws and regulations attempted to impose order on these contradictions. Some dynasties required curfews, others demanded annual inspections. Some restricted the number of entertainment houses. Others banned them outright for a season or two. But the effect was always temporary. The pleasure quarters adapted like water, flowing into whatever shape the moment required. They renamed themselves. They resized. They moved from main streets to back alleys, from open markets to enclosed courtyards. When crackdowns intensified, they disguised themselves as music academies, poetry salons, or tea houses. Culture shielded them. Human need sustained them. And over time, the state learned a simple truth. The pleasure quarters could be reshaped, redirected, regulated, but never eliminated. They filled the space that no law could erase, a space woven from silence, from need, from the small cracks where ritual and reality drifted apart. There is a gentle irony here. The pleasure quarters were often condemned as morally dangerous, yet they also preserved art, poetry, music, dance, and storytelling during eras when war or politics threatened to extinguish them. Many traditions that later became staples of Chinese performing arts were nurtured in these houses, where musicians, writers, and dancers found refuge, patronage, and appreciative audiences. So when historians speak of these quarters as shadows of society, they overlook the light glowing inside them, the cultural cultivation, the quiet empathy exchanged across tables, the emotional knowledge kept alive by women who were both marginalized and essential. And as night deepens around this chapter, the moral contradictions no longer feel harsh. They feel like the gentle movement of dusk and dawn, inevitable, cyclical, shaped by human nature rather than law. The pleasure quarters endured because they lived where human truth lives, in the quiet, unregulated spaces between who we want to be and who we are. And it is in those same spaces, soft and dimly lit, that stories for sleep find their home, reminding us that contradictions, when examined with tenderness, can lull the mind the way soft waves lull the shore.
There is a quiet truth about the pleasure quarters of ancient China that rarely appears in official histories, yet it shaped entire eras from the shadows. These districts were not only places of song, poetry, and companionship, they were also crossroads of power, soft-lit rooms where information drifted as gently as lantern smoke, and secrets loosened themselves from weary tongues the way knots loosen after long travel. And tonight, as we drift deeper into this chapter, we're going to wander through that hidden layer. Not the dramatic version told in theatrical plays, but the soft, slow, sleep-ready version wrapped in stillness, shaped by the quiet hum of human nature. Imagine a late evening in a bustling imperial city. Outside, the streets are cooling after a warm day. The lanterns sway lightly from wooden beams. You can hear the distant murmur of a market winding down, the soft clatter of carriage wheels fading into alleys lined with willow trees. And behind a carved wooden door, painted in muted reds and aged gold, lies one of the city's pleasure houses. Inside, the lighting is gentle, shaded by silk drapes that soften every corner. Incense drifts like pale ribbons through the air. Conversations float softly, never rising above the music of a pipa echoing from a nearby room. It is in this atmosphere, warm, dim, and unhurried, that information begins to flow, not deliberately, not like a spy thriller, but naturally, the way thoughts slip out when people feel safe. Officials, after long days of ceremony and protocol, would sometimes speak more freely than they intended. Scholars, warmed by rice wine, would muse about court rumors. Traveling merchants would share news from distant provinces. Grain shortages, shifting alliances, whispers of unrest along the borders.
And because the courtesans were trained not only in music and poetry, but also in listening, they became quiet collectors of these fragments. They didn't seek them, they simply received them, the way a still pond receives falling leaves. Some of these women became known, not publicly, but within the subtle network of those who moved between the palace, the markets, and the military outposts for their uncanny ability to understand the currents beneath political events. A general might confide a worry he dared not voice in the barracks. A governor might complain about a rival's ambition. A wealthy trader might mention a shift in prices that hinted at an impending policy change. All of it seemingly casual, harmless, drifting in the glow of lamplight. And yet, over months and years, these fragments formed patterns. From those patterns came influence, not loud or forceful, but soft, like a hand guiding the edge of a drifting boat. To understand this, imagine a specific scene, not dramatic, but gentle. A courtesan named Yunshu sits beside a table carved from elm wood. A bowl of warm tea rests between her hands. Across from her is a scholar official, exhausted after presenting memorials at court. He speaks quietly, almost absently, about a proposal being debated. Nothing confidential, nothing dangerous, just a few hesitant thoughts about tax reforms being pushed by a rival faction. Yunshu listens, her expression calm, her presence comforting. She does not ask questions. She does not coax. She simply makes the space feel safe. Later that night, when another patron arrives, a merchant who often funds local scholars, she mentions in a soft and sleepy tone only that the officials seem troubled lately. The merchant nods. He has heard rumors too. Her comment aligns with whispers he picked up on the docks. A tiny thread added to a fabric already being woven. It is in these small, barely noticeable exchanges that influence lived, not through manipulation, but through the natural flow of human conversation in places where people allowed themselves to relax. And so the pleasure quarters became quiet bridges between worlds that rarely met honestly elsewhere. The world of officials, the world of merchants, the world of travelers, the world of performers, not by design, but by the gentle gravity of human connection. As we drift deeper into the hidden politics of the pleasure quarters, the edges between intimacy and power begin to blur, softening into something subtle, almost atmospheric. These places were not designed to influence empires, and yet influence happened, not through schemes or manipulation, but through the gentle gravity created when people spoke freely, without armor, in a room lit only by lantern glow. In ancient China, true political insight rarely came from official reports. It came from the spaces where people accidentally told the truth. A general might embellish his victories in court, but after 2 cups of warmed wine in a quiet chamber, he might admit that morale in the border camps was low. A magistrate might boast about stability in his district during daytime assemblies, But in the soft hours of night, he might confess that grain stores were thinning, or that an upcoming inspection worried him more than he let on. A wealthy salt merchant might whisper about price shifts or caravans being delayed, clues that hinted at shortages long before they appeared in public records. And courtesans, skilled not only in art but in listening, became the keepers of these small truths. Not spies, not manipulators, simply witnesses who understood what the silences meant. Imagine one of them. Her name is Ming Yu, known for her calm presence and the way she could make a room feel as though time was moving slower. She sits by a window framed with bamboo blinds, and the moon spills its silver light across the wooden floor. A military official traveling back to the capital for an audience with the emperor rests across from her. His armor is tucked away, replaced by a simple robe. In the privacy of this gentle space, he speaks quietly about tensions rising in the Northwest. Nothing classified, just the sort of weary honesty that slips out when the night feels safe. Ming Yu listens, her expression serene, her breath steady. She does not store his words with intention. She simply absorbs them, the way a quiet room absorbs echoes. Later, a scholar she often hosts arrives. He has connections with ministers who draft new policies. Ming Yu does not repeat the official's words. Instead, she mentions, in a soft, contemplative tone, that the general seemed troubled by the winds this season. She says nothing more, yet something about her tone stirs the scholar's memory. He recalls a rumor he overheard in the ministry hall. The two unrelated threads settle together in his mind, forming the faint outline of a pattern. This is how influence worked, indirectly, gently, and often without awareness from anyone involved. Courtesans were not strategists, but they were present in a space where many worlds overlapped: merchants, soldiers, scholars, envoys, diplomats. Their rooms, warm and quiet, became accidental crossroads of empire. And sometimes, in rare moments, a courtesan's understanding of human behavior allowed her to gently nudge the direction of an idea. There is a story, softened here for peaceful listening, of a woman named Liang Xiu. She was known not for beauty, but for intuition, so sharp it felt like she could hear meaning behind words. One night, a minor official arrived, flustered, after an argument at the palace. He complained about a new edict that seemed reckless. Liang Xiu listened patiently as he vented, offering tea and the comfort of silence. When he finally paused, she didn't offer advice. She simply asked, in a slow, thoughtful tone, "Do the people who wrote the edict understand the hearts of the ones it will affect?" The question echoed in his mind long after he left her chamber. It wasn't criticism. It wasn't suggestion. It was simply reflection. But the next day, he hesitated before endorsing the edict. He asked his superior whether more consultations should be made. A tiny shift, barely noticeable, yet it changed the tempo of the debate. This, too, was a kind of influence, gentle, rooted in empathy, born not from ambition, but from the quiet clarity that emerges when someone truly listens. In the pleasure quarters, where voices were softer and masks were lighter, truth often drifted into the open like a lantern floating down a river, slow, glowing. unforced. As we drift into the final stretch of this chapter, the political undercurrents of the pleasure quarters become even softer, like distant waves folding slowly against a quiet shore. By now, you can sense the rhythm of these places, the way their influence was never sharp or deliberate, but gentle and diffused, shaped not by ambition, but by the simple fact that people share more of themselves when the night feels safe. One of the most unusual aspects of the pleasure quarters was how they allowed people of vastly different worlds to cross paths in ways that would never happen within the rigid structure of official life. A general could sit across from a wandering poet. A district magistrate could speak with a merchant who imported rare silks. A young courier could overhear the worries of men far above his rank. And a courtesan, with her gift for reading human emotions, could weave these worlds into a kind of quiet tapestry, one that revealed the shifting moods of the empire long before the court ever noticed. The most interesting thing about this influence is that it did not depend on strategy. It depended on presence, on the ability to listen without judgment, and to speak in a way that helped others hear themselves clearly. To understand this, imagine a courtesan named Yan Luo, known in her district not for beauty or music, but for an unusual calm that made even anxious men settle like stirred water returning to stillness. One evening, a mid-ranking official visited her house. He had spent weeks dealing with disputes between two powerful families, each accusing the other of corruption. Exhausted, he confessed, not in detail, but in tone, that he feared the conflict might spread into something larger. Yan Luo didn't ask for specifics. Instead, she brewed a pot of jasmine tea and placed it before him. As he drank, she remarked gently that when two trees grow too close, even the wind can push them into quarrel. The official smiled faintly at the metaphor. It wasn't a solution, but it allowed him to step back from his anxiety, to see the conflict not as a personal failure, but as part of a larger pattern. The next day, he approached the dispute with more clarity, choosing mediation rather than escalation. The influence was subtle, indirect, something that neither he nor Yan Luo would ever describe as political. And yet the ripple it created shaped the course of a local struggle. Stories like this, soft, nearly invisible, were part of why pleasure quarters became accidental centers of information. They were places where the empire breathed out its secrets in whispers rather than proclamations, where thoughts unspoken in the bronze halls of government slipped out in candlelit rooms. And there were darker undercurrents too, though we will soften them here for peaceful listening. In some eras, certain courtesans became unofficial informants, not through coercion, but because powerful men trusted them more than they trusted colleagues. A visiting envoy might share his impressions of the court. A military advisor might speak of supply shortages on the frontier. A minister's aide might mention disagreements brewing within the capital. These women did not scheme. They simply listened, and sometimes, when approached discreetly, passed along pieces of information to people who needed to know. Merchants, clan leaders, local officials, helping them prepare for storms the wider world had not yet felt. But the true essence of their role was not espionage, it was understanding. Their influence came from the same skill that allowed them to soothe restless hearts: empathy. In a world built on hierarchy, they offered something rare: honest conversation, unguarded feelings, the comfort of being heard. And when people feel heard, they reveal truths they didn't even know they carried. Those truths drifted outward, subtle as perfume on night air, shaping decisions, shifting alliances, guiding choices in ways that no law or decree could trace. As you settle into the final breaths of this chapter, imagine those lamp-lit rooms again, the quiet music, the soft rustle of silk, the warmth of tea, the murmured stories shared without intention. Influence here moved like moonlight on water, gentle, reflective, impossible to grasp, and yet illuminating everything it touched.
When we step into the cultural memory of ancient China, we discover something curious and beautiful. The pleasure quarters did not vanish when dynasties fell. They lingered, slipping into poetry, into paintings, into shimmering lines of novels passed quietly between scholars, into the soft rhythm of operas sung beneath colored lanterns. If earlier chapters explored the hidden mechanics of power and emotion, this chapter is where everything becomes art, where history transforms into imagery, and where the memory of these districts drifts like incense through the collective imagination. To understand this, imagine opening an old scroll painting. The silk is worn at the edges, its colors mellowed by centuries. The scene depicts a moonlit pavilion along a riverbank. A willow tree bends gently over the water. A courtesan in pale robes stands by the railing, her silhouette softened by the lantern beside her. A pipa rests against her arm, and though the painting is silent, you can almost hear a single plucked note hanging delicately in the air. That moment, frozen in ochre, jade, and ink, captures how artists remembered the pleasure quarters. Not scandalous, not loud, but atmospheric, fragile, built upon mood rather than spectacle. It is this quiet mood that shaped their presence in Tang poetry. Poets of the era wandered freely between temples, markets, and entertainment houses, and they carried those impressions like warm embers back to their writing desks. In their poems, the pleasure quarters were often framed not as places of indulgence, but as sanctuaries, temporary shelters where travelers, scholars, and officials found a few hours of music to soften the sharp edges of life. A single couplet
often written with the brush's lightest touch, could hold an entire world of longing. Imagine a line whispered across time. Under lantern light, her song drifted like mist over the river. Whether the poet was speaking of a real woman or simply the ache in his own heart hardly mattered. What mattered was the feeling, the way the night gathered around the music, the way the world seemed suspended in the gentle glow of the moment. Ming and Qing novels carried these impressions further. In their pages, courtesans became fully realized characters, clever, witty, gifted in poetry and calligraphy, capable of shaping the lives of the scholars who came to them for solace. These stories did not portray the pleasure quarters as places of chaos. Instead, they depicted them as emotional landscapes, rooms where time slowed, where the heart spoke more honestly than it could in the strict daylight of official life. Even Chinese opera embraced this image. In many plays, the courtesan appears not as a figure of desire, but as an embodiment of elegance and sorrow, her voice rising through the theater like a soft ribbon tying together the pain and beauty of the story. It is this duality, grace mixed with quiet melancholy, that kept the memory of the pleasure quarters alive long after the buildings themselves disappeared. To understand how powerful this memory is, return again to the scroll painting in your mind. Look slowly, as if your eyes were moving with the pace of sleep. Notice the lantern. Notice how its glow softens the wooden beams of the pavilion. Notice the way the river reflects a streak of pale moonlight. And then notice the courtesan's posture, not dramatic, not inviting, simply pensive. She is listening, perhaps, to a distant flute, or she is waiting for someone who may never come, or she is simply standing there, letting the night breathe around her. In that stillness, something gentle happens. The painting becomes less about entertainment and more about the human soul, its longing, its solitude, its fragile search for connection. And as you rest in the quiet aura of this chapter, you can feel how collective memory works, slowly, softly, shaping the past into something dreamlike, soothing, and luminous.
When we turn from painted scrolls to the written word, the memory of the pleasure quarters deepens even further, weaving itself into the language of longing that shaped so much of China's literary tradition. Poetry, novels, essays, and even idle notes penned in the margins of scholars' journals carried echoes of these places, not as settings of indulgence, but as dreamlike stages where the human heart revealed its quietest truths. To feel this presence, imagine opening a worn anthology of Tong poetry. The pages crack softly, like the sound of a lantern wick being trimmed. In one poem, a traveler describes wandering through the capital after rain. The streets glisten like polished stone. A distant lute drifts through the mist, faint as a memory. And then, almost as if speaking to himself, the poet writes of a voice behind a silk curtain that loosened the knot in my chest. He doesn't name the singer, He doesn't describe her looks. What he captures is the feeling, the sense of being momentarily freed from the weight he carried on the road. In another poem, a scholar recalls visiting a riverside pavilion lit by peach-colored lanterns. He writes of the water holding the reflection of a courtesan's sleeve as she lifted her instrument. The poem contains only 7 lines, yet each one glows with a soft melancholy, like moonlight resting on still water. These poems made the pleasure quarters part of China's emotional vocabulary. They became symbols of impermanence, of tenderness, of the fleeting connections that shape a life but leave no trace in official records. Ming and Qing novels expanded this imagery, giving the women of these quarters distinct voices, thoughts, and inner worlds. Many of these fictional courtesans were portrayed as more perceptive than the scholars who visited them. They read emotions the way others read books. They understood silence more deeply than philosophy. And through them, the pleasure quarters became places of reflection, rooms where characters discovered something about themselves they couldn't express in the strict, duty-bound world outside. One famous novel describes a courtesan composing a poem for a heartbroken scholar. She writes it in a delicate script on a fan, the ink so light it seems almost afraid to touch the paper. The poem speaks of a single autumn leaf, trembling on a branch, unsure whether the next gust will set it free or leave it clinging to the tree. The scholar carries that fan for years, not because of the courtesan, or because of the story between them, but because the feeling in the poem captured something he could never say aloud. Operas carried this emotional lineage to the stage. Under the glow of painted backdrops, actresses portrayed courtesans with gestures, slow and deliberate, each movement like a brushstroke on silk. Their voices rose softly, never hurried, never forceful, as if shaped by the same wind that rustles the willows along riverbanks. In these performances, the pleasure quarters became metaphors, places where the soul floated between belonging and letting go. Even today, when we watch ancient operas, that atmosphere lingers. The stage may be wooden, the actors may be modern, but the mood, the softness, the melancholy, the quiet yearning still feels like stepping into a lantern-lit room from centuries ago. Perhaps the most revealing trace of these districts in cultural memory lies not in poetry or opera, but in how often artists return to the same image. A lone woman beneath the moon, holding a musical instrument, her gaze focused somewhere beyond the frame. She is not waiting, she is not longing. She is simply inhabiting a moment, and through her stillness, viewers feel their own hearts reflected back at them. In this way, the pleasure quarters became less a physical space and more a symbol, a vessel for the emotional currents that slip beneath the surface of daily life.
As we move into the final breath of this chapter, the pleasure quarters begin to dissolve into something even more delicate. Not places, not stories, but symbols, persistent shapes in the cultural imagination that returned again and again, no matter how many dynasties rose or fell. At this stage of history, the districts no longer existed in their original form, yet in memory they grew softer, more luminous, like lantern light lingering on the surface of a river long after the lantern itself has drifted away. To understand this lingering glow, imagine holding a worn collection of Song-era paintings. The cover is frayed, the pages smell faintly of ink and sandalwood. Inside, you find a scene repeated by many artists across generations. A woman, seated near a moonlit window, her guqin resting across her lap. Her head is slightly inclined, as though she is listening to something the viewer cannot hear. Outside the window, a single plum branch leans into the frame, its blossoms white as frost. The entire image feels like a moment suspended in breath. What you're seeing is not a portrait of a real courtesan. It is an idea. The idea of longing, of impermanence, of beauty touched by sadness. This image found its way into novels as well. In one tale from the Ming era, a scholar discovers an old painting in a market stall. The painting shows a courtesan standing under falling petals. The scholar buys it, not because he recognizes her, but because the expression in her eyes reminds him of a feeling he once carried but could never name. Years later, he still keeps the painting in his study, and every time he looks at it, he feels as if she is asking him a question he is never quite able to answer. Opera, too, embraced this symbolism. Performers often portrayed courtesans with movements so slow that the audience could feel the weight of each breath. A hand rising, a sleeve falling, a single step echoing softly across a polished stage. These gestures were not meant to mimic real life. They were designed to evoke an emotion, the quiet ache that lingers after a farewell, or the sweetness of a moment that passes too quickly. In this way, the pleasure quarters became a language of atmosphere. Artists used them the way poets use moonlight, not to describe a scene, but to awaken a feeling. Sometimes that feeling was melancholy, sometimes tenderness, sometimes a sense of drifting, like a small boat rocked gently by water you cannot see. And sometimes the feeling was simply stillness. Stillness is often overlooked, yet it lies at the heart of all sleep stories. A still moment, a woman listening to the wind, a lantern trembling in night air, a brushstroke frozen halfway across silk, invites the mind to slow its pace, to breathe a little deeper, to soften its grip on the day. That is why artists returned again and again to these images, not because they were sensational, but because they were calming, quiet, and timeless. The pleasure quarters, transformed in memory, offered a landscape where the heart could rest. Even scholars who rarely stepped into such places found them comforting in the realm of imagination. For them, the districts became metaphors, vast, lantern-lit spaces where characters confronted the loneliness of being human. It is no coincidence that some of the most famous literary figures of the late imperial era wrote their most intimate reflections while referencing these atmospheric settings. The rooms were never described in detail. Instead, writers focused on the tone, the way shadows crossed a paper screen, the way footsteps sounded on wooden floors, the way a voice softened as it drifted through a half-drawn curtain. And so, as this chapter quiets itself, the memory of the pleasure quarters rests not in buildings or names, but in sensations. Moonlight, silk, fragrance, footsteps, distant music. They remind us that the past lives within the textures of emotion more than the facts of history. In this quiet realization, the story settles into the soft folds of night, leaving you with the lingering warmth of a world shaped by longing, art, and the gentle pulse of human memory.
As we enter the final chapter of this long, drifting journey, the pleasure quarters of ancient China begin to fade. Not abruptly, not violently, but with the slow, inevitable softness of lantern light thinning at the edge of dawn. Their decline cannot be traced to a single ruler or a single reform. Instead, it unfolded over centuries like a silk painting whose colors gradually muted with time. Imagine for a moment the late imperial period. The Qing dynasty, heavy with internal tensions, began implementing waves of regulation meant to reinforce Confucian order. Officials issued proclamations condemning frivolous gatherings, and local magistrates tightened rules on entertainment districts. But these decrees felt more like gestures than solutions, for the pleasure quarters were not merely places, they were networks of people, stories, and survival. Still, the change was slow but certain. War arrived like a long winter. Rebellions erupted, borders shifted, and cities once known for their festive night streets became landscapes of smoke and scarcity. In times of fear, people clung less to luxury and more to simple survival. The sound of peepaw music drifting from a balcony at dusk became rarer, replaced by the clatter of marching boots. You might imagine one of these districts in its twilight years. A tea house still opens its doors, though fewer guests arrive. A courtesan practices her guqin in the dim light. Her fingers trace old melodies no longer requested. Outside, the street that once flickered with lanterns now feels subdued. Dust gathers where crowds once lingered. This fading was not only caused by war. Modernization reshaped the world with equal force. As the 19th century bled into the 20th, railways stitched new pathways across the land. Foreign influences poured into treaty ports. Newspapers, telegraphs, and Western-style education shifted the rhythms of daily life. Suddenly, the old pleasure quarters felt out of step with a society racing toward modernity. And with modernization came laws, real, structured laws rather than the cyclical crackdowns of dynasties past. By the early Republican era, new legal codes declared many of these districts obsolete. Streets once alive with poetry, music, and quiet longing now dimmed into memory. Some buildings were converted into shops. Others fell to rubble. Some simply remained as walls with no stories left inside. Yet even as the physical structures faded, the emotional imprint remained. People continued to write novels, operas, and essays filled with echoes of what those nights once were. Artists, sensing the end, painted the districts with a gentleness they might not have afforded them while they were still alive, like saying farewell to an old friend. As we linger in this moment of decline, it is important to understand that this is not a tragedy. It is simply the way time moves, never abrupt, always flowing. Even red light districts of the modern world, in their neon glow and bustling anonymity, are but distant cousins,
similar in purpose, but stripped of the poetry, ritual, and layered social worlds that defined the ancient pleasure quarters. Tonight, however, we do not compare or judge. We simply observe the transition, the soft dissolving of one cultural form into another. Imagine a narrow alley in the fading years of the Qing dynasty. The lanterns hang lower now. Their paper is thin, and the wind pulls the edges loose. A musician, once surrounded by admirers, now plays to an empty courtyard. Her notes drift upward, touching the beams of the old building before dissolving into the night. This is the moment where decline meets memory, where silence begins to reclaim spaces once filled with song. And as we step quietly into this final chapter, we move not toward an ending, but toward an echo.
So, if you pause here, in the middle of this slow unraveling, you can almost feel the weight of centuries turning to mist. The pleasure quarters did not vanish all at once. They dissolved like ink in water, leaving faint currents that still move beneath the culture of cities today. In their final decades, these districts lived in a strange twilight. Reformers criticized them as relics of an old world. Officials called them moral hazards. Yet, for many ordinary people, they remained familiar anchors in a world shifting too quickly to understand. When steamships arrived, when foreign concessions grew, when clocks began to dictate time instead of sun and shadows, the old rhythms that had shaped nightlife for 1,000 years began to drift into memory. The pleasure quarters, once vibrant with poetry and half-whispered music, slowly lost their place. What remained was not scandal, but nostalgia. Imagine a scholar returning to a district he once visited in his youth. The long corridor he remembers is still there, but the fragrance of incense is gone. The curtains have been replaced, their colors plain instead of shimmering. He walks slowly, passing rooms that once held conversations about art, philosophy, and the unpredictable beating of human hearts. Now those rooms hold furniture for sale or loom in silence behind locked doors. He pauses before a balcony where he once heard a guqin played under the full moon. The balcony is still there, but the railing is cracked and no music floats from it. It is not sorrow he feels, only the tender ache of knowing that time changes all things, even the places that once felt eternal. Modernization, like a tide, swept through every street. Electricity replaced lanterns, streetcars replaced sedan chairs, and with those changes came new ideas of entertainment. Dance halls, cinemas, cabarets, places filled with bright lights and noise. Compared to the subtle world of the old pleasure quarters,
These spaces felt louder, sharper, less intimate. Yet they too borrowed something from the past. The desire to gather, to dream, to be momentarily released from the strict patterns of daily life. The lineage continued, but the poetry softened. By the mid-20th century, most of the old districts had disappeared, not through destruction, but through quiet absorption. Cities grew over them. New buildings layered themselves atop old streets. Some alleys changed names, others vanished from memory entirely. But once in a while, if you walk through an old quarter of Shanghai, Suzhou, or Nanjing at night, you might feel it, a faint echo, the gentle residue of something that once existed. A narrow alley paved with uneven stones, a wooden balcony with carved latticework, a pale lantern hanging from a hook, its red paint faded almost to white. These remnants do not call attention to themselves. They simply remain, like memories that do not insist on being remembered, yet linger quietly, because the hearts of past generations once beat within those walls. When we rest in these lingering fragments, we understand why the pleasure quarters hold such a powerful place in cultural memory. They were not just districts of entertainment. They were maps of emotion, repositories of laughter, longing, sorrow, and fleeting joy. They were places where people who lived constrained lives could, for a few hours, breathe differently. And that feeling does not vanish simply because a building disappears. It lives on, in poetry, in music, in the soft, wistful tone older generations use when speaking of the old streets. Nothing about this is dramatic. It is gentle, like snow gathering in the corners of a courtyard. And as these districts faded from physical geography, they entered another realm, the realm of story. And that, perhaps, is where they were always meant to live.
Now, as we reach the final stretch of our journey, the ancient pleasure quarters become softer than a half-remembered dream. Their outlines blur, their colors dim. What remains is not the sound of laughter or music or footsteps, but the quietest residue of human longing drifting through time. Imagine walking down one last alley at night. The stones beneath your feet are cool, worn by generations. Above you, a lantern sways gently in the breeze. Its red color has faded to a soft rose, and the paper is thin enough for the candlelight inside to tremble through. This alley once led to a bustling quarter. Crowded balconies, embroidered curtains, the murmur of scholars quoting poetry while courtesans plucked strings of the pipa. But now, only stillness remains. A door stands slightly open, revealing an empty room where dust floats like pale snow. A low table sits in the center, its wood darkened by age. On it
rests a single hairpin, delicate, jade green, left behind by someone whose name is no longer spoken. You pause, feeling the gentle ache of time moving through this space. It does not feel sad. It feels peaceful, like a lake settling after a long rain. The decline of the ancient pleasure quarters was not an ending, but a dissolving. Reform, war, modernization, shifting moral codes, each played a role, but none defined the true story. The real story is quieter. It is the story of people who lived, laughed, sang, hoped, mourned, and vanished, leaving behind faint traces that the world absorbs without fanfare. And in that silence, something tender lives. If you listen closely, you might still hear it. The soft pluck of a Guchin string carried on the wind. The rustle of silk sleeves brushing past as someone turns toward the light. The distant echo of a poem recited under a willow tree where lanterns once glowed like floating moons. These sounds do not come from the past alone. They rise from the human desire to feel connected, understood, and momentarily free. Even the modern red light districts of our world cannot erase that longing. They may be brighter, louder, harsher, but they do not possess the quiet rituals, the coded gestures, the poetic undercurrent that once defined the ancient districts. Those qualities can only survive in memory, in art, and in the soft attention of those who pause to look back. Tonight, you are one of those people, and so the old quarters open themselves to you, not with spectacle, but with a whisper. You walk farther down the alley. The lantern's glow dims behind you. The breeze carries the scent of old sandalwood, faint as a forgotten blessing. In the distance, a single note of music lingers, stretched thin across the night. It might be your imagination, or it might be a final thread of that world gently unraveling. At the alley's end, the city fades into darkness. The ground becomes softer, the walls lower, the night sky wider. This is where history hands itself back to silence. And now, if you are still awake, dear friend, let the old streets slowly drift away from your mind. Let the night cradle you and sleep